It is very important to remember that as an Australian employee, even on a temporary visa, they have access to rights, and we see visa holders really take a step back and not look after themselves, in the sense that they don't really look into what the rights are and what they can do.
I'm Dani Valent, and this is Dirty Linen, the podcast that takes the issues the hospitality industry finds hard to air in public and shakes them all about. This fortnight on Dirty Linen, we're talking to temporary visa holders. We're also talking about them with people who know this part of our society and the ins and outs of it. Zefy Souvlakis is an immigration lawyer. She got in touch with me about a month ago and offered to assist some of the visa holders that I'm in touch with legal advice. Many of those people have taken up her kind offer, and every Monday evening she helps them work through some of their issues and negotiate the tangled web of immigration rules, restrictions, regulations in a very tricky landscape of a global pandemic with great uncertainty. Things are changing, some things aren't changing enough, but Zefy, it's a bit of a tangled web, isn't it?
It definitely is. I would say, immigration is tangled generally. It's a very complicated area of law, one of the most complicated ones, one would say, but it's definitely become even more messy, if you like, given the current situation. We were definitely not prepared for what happened, and having to navigate through this situation with very little guidance, I would say it's definitely been quite challenging.
What makes somebody want to be a migration lawyer? How did you get into this field?
It's a very good question. For me personally, I started mainly because I moved to Australia about 10 years ago. I was lucky enough that my father was born here, so I didn't really have to, go through the migration process in great detail. But that in itself kind of sparked their interest in me, where I had to look into the background and what has really developed Australia to the point that it is now. And I saw that, it is a very complex area. It's a very ever-changing area, and that kind of brought me to where I am today.
And is most of your work to do with skilled visa holders, skilled migrants to Australia, or is it? Yeah, tell us a little bit about what you do in normal times.
Definitely. So it's quite diverse, I would say. There's a range of applicants that we assist with corporate immigration. So a lot of I would say transfers for visas from overseas for executives, but also skilled migration for skilled out migrants that want to make Australia home, and we assist with that process, and also for other more family-focused matters, I would say. So we do a lot of partner visas and other family-related visas, but also a lot of appeals. There's quite a bit of administrative appeal tribunal matters that we handle, and also federal court appeals that if we do need to take it that step further, that we also handle.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the joys and the frustrations of what you do?
The joy is definitely that the gratitude that we get from applicants that we've assisted successfully, and knowing that we've contributed that extra little bit that has helped them make a life for themselves here in Australia. That is, I would say, you can't really top that. The frustrations overall, I would say that it is the uncertainty that we'll often deal with the department. There's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of silence from their end. Obviously, it's a very specific area of law, and I'm sure that they don't want to be leaving applicants in the dark. But we find that very often The legislation is either so specific that it kind of leaves out a lot of people, or very vague so that it's very hard for us to advise, and then having to go through all of that while waiting and waiting with no real updates from them, that can really make the process for us frustrating, and for our clients frustrating as well.
A lot of emotions. I guess your clients would be very emotional about the waiting, because it really affects their lives.
Definitely, absolutely.
I didn't know much about the immigration system at all before I became quite focused on this issue of temporary visa holders in hospitality through the pandemic. And I've just been like amazed, appalled, baffled by how incredibly complex it is, and how hard it is. I mean, I'm a lay person. I did a couple of years of law actually, but I can't say that would have helped me that much. Just to try to disentangle it and to work out how it applies to any one person's specific situation. It's incredibly complicated, isn't it?
Definitely. As I said, we're very often faced with situations where the legislation is either very specific, which means that it leaves out the vast majority of applicants, where they're sitting on that grey area, and our job is, I guess, to try to help them find clarity in what it is that they're looking to do, or the advice that they're seeking. Or it's cases where the legislation is really outdated or really vague, and we're again trying to figure out how to apply it practically for affected visa applicants, that they need to have a black or white answer so that they can move on with their lives, and that can very often be difficult, because we do have our the client's best interest in mind, but there's a line that we cannot cross as far as the advice that we give. We try to do the best we can, but very often we're just stuck in that situation where it's not easy to untangle, as you said.
It's something that people obviously do want a clear answer on. Is it okay? Is it not? Can I stay? Must I go? It's they're very big life questions that very, very hard to be in the middle of. What are some of the things that you've encountered since the coronavirus crisis struck us in terms of visa holders in Australia?
Definitely. So with most, especially temporary visa holders, there's specific visa conditions that they have to abide with and or abide by. And what we've seen is that, due to factors outside of their control, they're actually not in a position to comply by those conditions. So the biggest challenge has been trying to advise our clients that want to do the right thing, and they don't want to breach their conditions, while keeping in mind that very often they don't have a choice. For example, temporary visa holders that have been stood down, where in cases where there are visas that don't allow them to actually take breaks like that, or they're not allowed to go from full-time to part-time work. But thankfully, we have seen a little bit more clarity as far as that goes, and the department has been a little bit more understanding with these kinds of conditions. So there is a little bit more flexibility, not enough if you ask me, but there is a little bit more flexibility as far as those types of conditions go. And then we've also seen that especially in the last, I would say, 3 months or so, where we've seen that really strict lockdown and specific industries having to shut down, visa holders that are depending on that day-to-day work to survive in Australia. There's really no support, and that in itself becomes quite problematic, because that obviously it has a domino effect into other areas of their lives as well.
Yeah, so just to get a bit specific, there's one case that I forwarded to you this morning by email, someone who'd emailed me. He's on a temporary short-term skilled visa 482. He has as part of that visa, there's a requirement that he needs to earn a certain amount in every financial year. However, he's then been stood down, so he's obviously not earning. He's freaking out because he knows that he's not abiding by the condition of the visa under which he came into Australia. So I mean, in that case, this is one of the situations you're talking about, that requirement has been relaxed, hasn't it?
Well, not exactly. So it's always a bit of a gray answer, if you like. There's two sides to that. One is obviously the visa holder and the compliance by those conditions on his or her visa. At the same time, employers and sponsors in Australia have obligations that they need to comply with everything that's going on. Obviously the department is more understanding and a little bit more flexible. So in cases where there is a pro rata arrangement and they do reduce hours, then they don't necessarily have to comply by that condition to earn that certain amount. So that's why it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's kind of a maybe that, and we have to approach it depending on the particular applicant and their particular circumstances. So in short, that requirement specifically doesn't apply in this particular situation, but at the same time, the employer has an obligation to remunerate in accordance with a pro rata arrangement and agreement that they come with the visa holder.
Right, but sometimes if the employer is not sticking to their obligation, then that affects the ability of the employee to abide by the conditions of their visa. So it's
correct.
It's an impossible situation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and it's just very important to make sure that in these situations they get advice, and it's not very safe to assume, I guess, what right or wrong is. It's better to have that extra layer of support, even if it is, on a free basis, or if they're able to get advice from a professional on either party.
Yeah, well, I guess, of course, not working means not earning, means not much money. So it also puts these visa holders in a real bind when it comes to paying for legal advice. So that's a really tricky thing as well. And I think it's worth perhaps just talking a little bit about how much many of these people do invest in their time in Australia. Can you just talk through some of the costs related to coming to Australia to work?
Certainly, it is quite substantial, and it's very good that you're bringing it up because very often I think it kind of gets lost in the process of everything. But from an applicant's point of view, apart from if we're talking specifically about 482 visa holders, the employer sponsored temporary visas, in best case scenario, some employers cover for those fees, but that doesn't happen very often. In cases where the applicant has to bear the cost, you're looking anywhere between, I would say, $2,500 to $6,000 or $7,000, depending on their occupation as well, and that's government fees and professional fees if they are engaging a professional to assist them with the process. There's other fees that are not included there. It could be, police checks that they might have to do, or English tests that they might have to do. Very often translations, health insurance policies that they have to take out. So it definitely adds up, especially if they have consecutive temporary visas that they're lodging over a period of, 2, 4, 6 years that many of them do.
Yeah, because it's not a one-off cost. It's not like you pay and then you just wander along the pathway. Every time that you reapply or change your visa status, there are similar costs to do that.
Correct, exactly.
Zefy, a lot of these visa holders feel like they don't have many rights. They're so terrified of not being able to stay in Australia in many cases. They're very scared about losing their job. Perhaps they're just hanging on by a thread. Perhaps they're stood down. Perhaps they're getting, one shift a week, whatever it might be. Can you talk about that and about whether they still do have working rights even though their visa status is uncertain?
Yes, so that's a very important point, especially given the current situation. It is very important to remember that as an Australian employee, even on a temporary visa, they have access to rights, and very often there is a confusion around that. Obviously, because there is a power play or a position of a privilege to an extent when it comes to the employers, where we see visa holders really take a step back and not look after themselves, in the sense that they don't really look into what the rights are and what they can do with everything that's going on. So we try to remind them that, and obviously that's a last resort, but there is access to fair work, and for employees in Australia, there is all that extra source of support where, if they're unsure, if their employer says something, or if they offer them something that they're not sure that if it's legal or not, they can get in touch with her Fair Work, and they can have a discussion with them. They tend to be quite helpful. So I think that it's very important to remind them that even though there is that imbalance when it comes to employers and employees, they do have rights, and there is support there for them. It's definitely not easy when their livelihood depends on that extra shift, or the prospect of work perhaps in the near future. But I don't think that it's fair to let a situation just carry on because of that power play.
Do you think, I guess, pulling back a little bit from the immediate situation, do you think that the immigration system overall is good? Or, I mean, do you think it's inevitable that it's very complicated? Inevitable that there are delays? Inevitable that it's confusing? Do you think that's just the nature of immigration, and we just have to put up with it to a certain extent?
Yeah, that's a tough question. It's definitely. I definitely feel that there's a significant room for improvement. There's things that are purposely difficult, and there's parts of it that could definitely be a lot easier and more humane, if you like. I think that there's the delays, the insufficient resources that we have perhaps allocated to the migration process. They do take a toll on the visa applicants, and that is reflected to how they interact and how they to an extent settle in society over a period of time. So there's definitely things that we could be doing to improve the situation so that it is more humane as a process. I feel that what has happened over the years, and to be fair, there has been a slight improvement, I'd say, up until COVID. So things started to be a little bit faster, or a little bit more objective in their assessment, if you like, in the last 2 to 3 years compared to quite a while ago. But there's still a lot of, I would say, political background that to an extent translates into the processes and the requirements and how these are assessed by the Department of Home Affairs, which is the overseeing government body. So in that sense, there's definitely a lot of more work that we need to do to get it to a point where we can say that, Australian is actually treating visa holders or visa applicants in a fair and humane way.
When you say political, what kinds of things do you mean?
I don't want to get too into it, I guess, but it's definitely, we see a change in approach with migration with every change in government that happens every so often. So, whatever political or whatever agenda the particular party has with regards to migration, that is very quickly reflected in the processes, the speed with which certain things happen, and the requirements as well. We used to see a lot more, I would say, and it was a bit more unfair in a sense of how matters were handled in situations where there might have been, a very simple requirement that could have been addressed objectively. We saw that there was a lot more subjective assessment, and very often we felt that there was not enough communication. It was all very, paper-based and black or white. But the truth is that, we're talking about humans. We're not black and white. The average person that starts a migration process, we want to make sure that they meet all of their requirements, but very often as I said, it's a lot of grey. It's not as black or white as the department and the government would like it to be. So this is where we would expect a bit more support and more understanding and more of a humane conversation rather than that bureaucratic approach where it's you tick all the boxes or you don't, and then that results in a significant change in your life in the short and long term as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky one because it is a bureaucracy, and in a way it has to be. There has to be a system. Every person can't just be like, hi, I'm Jane and I want to start from scratch with this whole conversation about moving to Australia. So I guess there has to be a system. But as you say, there also has to be an understanding and I guess the resourcing that allows those people to be assessed in a reasonable time frame and with due regard for their humanity and their personal circumstances. So I guess each government draws the lines in different places. I think, if you look at the government's approach to refugees and the visas there, like some of the policy there does seem particularly cruel and designed to delay, designed to demoralise, designed to make people just give up. And it's been a disappointing surprise to me to dip a little bit into the working visas and find a similar tone in some of those documents and in the way some of those processes are applied and impact on people's lives. So yeah, I understand you don't want to go too much into the politics, but it is there's obviously ideology at play. It's not simply about people pushing pens and just pushing them a bit more slowly than they might. So yeah, it's a tricky one. There's one situation around temporary visa holders that doesn't get as much airtime, and that's the fate of people who are on Australian temporary visas, but they happen to be overseas when the borders closed. And many of those people are still stuck overseas. Can you talk a bit about those people and their situation?
Yes, so since the start of the pandemic, there's obviously been travel restrictions, both inbound and outwards for Australia, and temporary visa holders were some of the first ones that were affected by those travel exemptions. From what we're seeing, especially in the last, I would say, 2 to 4 weeks, there's definitely a lot more, a much more strict assessment of the criteria that allow, applicants to then travel back to Australia if they have been stuck overseas, as you said. So what we're seeing is that temporary visa holders that are either currently in Australia, they want to leave and then obviously return, or are already overseas and have been affected by the restrictions, they cannot make an entry to Australia, even in cases where they have a valid visa to return. And what that means is, a lot of people were actually, they got stuck overseas while they had a lot of financial responsibilities that they had to take care of here. That could be, rent or bills or certain memberships that they had, and then obviously their personal belongings and friends and in some cases family. So having to deal with the stress of that, knowing that you have a valid visa, but you can't actually, you're not allowed to come back in Australia. It's very frustrating. The requirements or the grounds on which you can get an exemption to travel, they are very strict, and they're becoming more strict as the situation escalates in Australia and especially Victoria. So what we're seeing is that the department is very reluctant to approve, even in cases where there's substantial evidence that the particular applicant might actually meet the requirements to be granted an exemption.
Yeah, it just puts some people in incredibly tough situations. I read a story yesterday about a woman who was in India caring for a sick family member when the borders closed. In Australia, she has a husband and a son. She applied 15 times on compassionate grounds to be allowed to return to Australia. And it was only on the 15th time that she was given leave to jump on a plane and come back home. And I mean, she had no idea why the 15th application was accepted. It was just refuse, 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 and then finally, like, yep, flights leaving tomorrow. So it's I mean, yeah, it's, as you say, these are real people with real life circumstances, incredibly stressful in a situation that's already stressful for all of us in different ways.
Absolutely. And there's so many stories like that.
Do you find it draining, like your work, because you do see people often when they are at such a stressful point in their lives, and you're not always able to give them a clear path forward?
It's not draining at all. It's actually, it definitely, over time, it takes a toll on us as well. So we try to, there's a lot of support, especially where I work. We talk about our clients quite a bit just to make sure that we get it off our chest, really. But with our line of work, it is very, client focused. So we try to be as empathetic as we can, and we try to be as understanding as we can. Very often, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to be factual, and we try not to let, obviously, emotion get in the way. But at the same time, as we said, these are real people, so it's very hard not to get emotionally, I would say, affected. But that's why we try to, give back a little bit, and especially in this current situation, we try to help as much as we can, even if it's not, strictly legal work. But it's the area of law where you learn how to deal with it over time, I would say.
If they gave you a magic wand and said, Zefy, you can change whatever you want to change about the immigration system, is there one visa class or one regulation or one way that a rule is applied that you just think, oh, this one that just has to go?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say that I would really like to be able to, as a professional, have a direct line of communication with the case officers that make assessments, so that that we can have that conversation and respectfully put our arguments and thoughts to them, instead of having to deal with this online system that is just, it feels very very unapproachable, really. So that if there's one thing I would change, that would be it.
I think I would change at the moment the stipulation that people on sponsored work visas were only able to work with the employer that sponsored them, even if it was just, for the period of the pandemic, because we spoke to Michael this week on the podcast. He's a sponsored chef, and he's just sitting at home, occasionally going fishing apparently, but he's unable to look for any other type of work. He's just hoping that his employer is able to stand him back up and re-employ him at some point.
Yes, and we've seen that quite a lot, especially with employer-sponsored visa holders that are limited. Given the situation, I would definitely expect to see a lot more flexibility as far as the department's instructions with these conditions. Not only to extend it so that people can actually get any type of work that they can, but also we're seeing that especially as of late, they have started not to scare anyone, but they have started cancellation processes for visa holders that have been found to be breaching their conditions, even due to factors outside of their control. And that is very, very unfortunate. It is obviously an added stress with on top of everything else that's going on. And it's a situation where we can get it across the line because we can explain, obviously, that a breach didn't necessarily occur by choice, but we would expect that there would be a lot more understanding when it comes to these processes, and at least try not to intimidate temporary visa holders, if you like, with these sorts of cancellation actions.
That is scary. So, for example, is that if a skilled worker hasn't worked for 60 days, that's one of the conditions of their visa, and then their visa is liable to be cancelled. So you've seen that happening, have you?
Yes, so that started recently, and it is unfortunate and it is disappointing. Effectively, what we're seeing is that the department is pushing for people that haven't managed to, stay employed or, comply with their conditions. There is that push for them to go back home. And that is really, really unfair, really, really, inconsiderate given everything that's going on. I don't think that a lot of them have been in Australia for many, many years, and to have that happen now where they've done everything right up until this point, it is at least unfair, I would say.
Well, especially as those particular workers are here because we need their skills. Like, the employer has had to show that they haven't been able to hire for that position locally. So that's really disappointing, and I'm sure there's some people who are listening to this who are now a bit concerned. Do you have any advice for them?
Be proactive. So if there's any kind of correspondence that they receive from the department, they should try, even, we said before, if they are able to get representation, they should. Otherwise, any kind of help that they can get, they should try to be as proactive as possible. Don't let that scare them, I guess. Overall, it is a very difficult situation for everyone, and I'm sure that especially, for employers as well, if we're going to talk about both sides, I'm sure that if employers were able to, hold on to some of these employees, they would. For that reason, there can be a bit of a conversation, if you want, or at least some sort of arrangement that they could come with their employers, so that they can at least stay at work, even if it is for on reduced hours. It's definitely difficult, and I don't mean to scare people, but definitely try to be proactive. Try to get advice or get help, whether it is from government bodies or private firms, or any kind. The more information that they have, basically, the better it will be for them, so that they can make informed decisions moving forward.
Well, Zefy, it's certainly a very complicated landscape, and it's great to have you help us disentangle it. And of course, fantastic all the work that you do for your clients, helping smooth their path to work and life in Australia. Thank you so much for decoding the immigration landscape for us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure, talking to you and getting to know all these people. Even if the circumstances aren't great, it's actually good to have that interaction.
Yeah, well, I think the pandemic sucks, but it has enabled me to meet some amazing people. So I'm grateful for that, at least. Thanks for being one of them, Zefy.
Yeah, thank you.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.